So within the webinar today, we'll be looking at question types and staggered answers, comparisons as a teaching tool, purpose and related vocabulary, the differences between features, and meeting the needs of purpose and audience. And the purpose of the webinar was to support centres with key trends that have been coming through so far within exams where significant marks may have been lost. These tend to link directly to new skill sets found within the reform subject content. If we start with question types and staggered answers, it's really important that learners are familiar with exam format and that they're guided to identify how many questions are worth how many marks. So questions where there are multiple marks, it implies that more than one answer is needed. For example, where a question is worth more than 1 mark, the latter mark or marks are usually dependent on answering the first mark correctly. So for example, is text A formal or informal? Give a reason for your answer. If they answered incorrectly for the first part of the question, then within that they wouldn't be able to secure the latter marks. This only differs where an indicated response is given in bold. So for example, use text A, give 2 reasons. It's imperative that the learner uses the referenced text to support their answer and that they don't elicit a response using their own ideas or experiences. So for example, the example that we've given there, using text A, they must extract the answer from text A. Comparisons as a teaching tool. Comparisons are new to level 1. You'll note that the word contrast has been omitted from the reformed qualification. It does not feature in the subject content. We expect learners to acknowledge that a comparison are similarities and differences that can be found across texts. So learners need to understand that information, ideas and opinions on the same topic may differ across the 2 text types. We'd be looking for learners to use connectives effectively and conjunction to demonstrate the ability to compare. Level 1 comparative connectives that we would expect to see would be words such as and, then, but, however. They're not penalised for using more sophisticated language such as therefore, moreover, furthermore, etc. If we think of purpose at level 1, there are now 4 purpose types that we would expect learners to have a clear understanding of. So those purpose types now are instruct, describe, explain, and persuade. The possible text types that we would facilitate at level 1 would be an advert, an email, instructions, letter, or report. The vocabulary linked to text type and purpose could be formal, informal, instructional, descriptive, explanatory, and persuasive. So the vocabulary used is very much dependent on the text type and the purpose of that text. And an example would be an advert would use persuasive language to meet the need of persuading the reader to do something. This, however, could be formal or informal. To break down the differences between features that we would find at level 1, we have language features, textual features, structural features, and organisational features, all very much different. So to give you some guidelines, the language features, we would expect learners to be able to consider the tone of the language. So is it formal, informal, instructional, persuasive, explanatory, descriptive, etc. Again, that will be very much dependent on text type. So it's really important that learners have a sound understanding of the different text types that could be in circulation. Textual features that they may find within a text would be bold, italics, use of images, sizes. So an example there may be if they are writing a report, they may use a header that is in a different font size to the remainder of the actual text. The following features are visual aspects of a text that give a clue to its status and relation to other pieces of text. So for example, structural features are what we used to refer to in the legacy qualification as presentational features. So those kind of features you would expect to find within each text type. So within a report, you definitely expect to see a title. You may find bullet points, you may find numbered lists. Where the organisational features differ, they are additional features associated with the visual aspect. So there may be a caption to an image, they may insert a table, they might use a footnote. So they are additional aspects to the structural features and very, very much different. Please note that paragraphs are not awarded nowadays under the structural features. These are awarded under a separate subject content. Where we discuss meeting the needs of purpose and audience, level 1 writing, bulleted prompts are given. Usually there are 3 bullet points of indicative content we would expect to see within the actual task. The learner must reference all of these within their written piece to meet the task requirements. We would also expect deference to the word count where given one task always has a word count. And in reality, this allows them further prompt to gauge how much to write for the second task. When we're putting together the writing tasks, the learner needs to consider the purpose and the associated vocabulary to meet the needs of the task and audience. An example of this would be for what you can see now on the screen. Task 1 is taking about our practice exams that are currently available online. You can see here the task descriptor asks the learner to write an email to the manager that includes information about your journey to the airport, your feelings about the service you received, and what you think the company should do for you. There is a time guideline for the learners to complete the task, and you will see there is also a suggested word count. So if we break this down in terms of how the learner may approach this particular task, we will first ask them to consider the purpose. So the purpose of this particular email is to explain what's happened within the task descriptors. The language that we may find within this email would be use of formal English and, again, explanatory vocabulary. Organisational features or structural features, well, definitely the structural features we'd expect to see within the email would be to, from, subject, date, and an appropriate salutation and closing. An organisational feature may be a footer if they want to add an additional footnote at the end. Textual features, we may see text given in bold or different font sizes to emphasise particular points of the actual mail. And then if the learner proofreads what they've actually put down there to make sure that the content covers all of the 3 bullet points given in the task descriptor, and then also a quick word count to make sure they are meeting the minimal requirement. Marks are lost if all of the task descriptors are not met and if the minimal word count has not been met. So writing hints and tips. If you consider the possible text types that are or could be found within current assessment material, they will be things such as an advert, an email, instructions, letter, and report. And it may be that you want to use these as actual teaching tasks, and they could be vocationally linked. So, for example, if you have learners who are working within construction environments, you may ask them to create a health and safety report that could be put on display in the staff room. or if you have learners who are working within business admin, you may help them to create emails to colleagues requesting information. So they don't have to be used as standalone activities. You can incorporate them into the vocational element as well. By doing that, by using them as a standard teaching task and a teaching tool, learners will be able to explore the language features associated with each. So for example, where I gave the health and safety report that you might ask learners to create to put into a staff room, the language features there, you'd be expecting them to use formal English, or it could be instructional as well, where they're looking at the recommendations that you'd normally find at the bottom of a report. You might also discuss structural features that might typically be found within each text type. So where you're asking them to create an email, again, you'd be looking for a to and a from, both of which must be functional email addresses. We'd be expecting to see a subject, a date, a salutation, and a close. So again, if learners apply these as a standard practice within the taught tasks, they have every opportunity of gaining maximum marks when it comes to the writing exams. It also helps them to identify these features and these traits or skill sets within the actual reading exams as well. Okay, so hopefully you found that snapshot teaching tool supportive. If you have any questions now, please pop them in and we'll answer as many as we possibly can. This webinar will be available via YouTube if you'd like to revisit. You can search for the Highfield group and you'll find it on there. Also, if you didn't attend the amplifications webinar towards the end of last year, that is also available, and that goes into further detail relative to each subject content and what our interpretation of those are. Do we have any questions? Okay, thank you for your attendance today. If you do have any questions that you think of after I end the webinar, please do feel free to email those in. Okay, we've just had one question in regarding a functional email address. So obviously the learner can devise their own email address. It doesn't have to be a true email address, but it must follow the correct format. So for example, jsmith@hotmail.co.uk or gmail.com, so that if in a real life context, that email will reach that person. So they can use their imagination in terms of creating an email address if it's not given within the task, but it must be a functional email address. There's a possible link. If you access the website, the Highfield website, and search for functional skills, practice assessment material is available on there, including the mark scheme, which is always good to look at. Then you know exactly what the learners will be awarded against. Teresa, you sent a question in regarding tone. Can you just explain a little bit more what you mean by that, please? Okay, so we did have a question regarding tone. When we're considering tone, really we're considering the use of the vocabulary there, so formal or informal, and is it appropriate throughout to the task? So for example, in the task that I gave there as an example, where you wanted to complain about the service, you can complain in a professional manner. We don't expect to see aggression or inappropriate use of language within that document. So we would expect a formal vocabulary use throughout the text. And where learners sometimes fall down as well is that they'll amalgamate the two. So they'll start off with using formal text, i.e. full English, and then by the end of the text, they're using contractions, omissions, and so on. So it's important that they have set in their mind before they start writing the task, what vocabulary am I going to use here, and make sure that they carry it through right to the end. I hope that helps. Okay, thanks very much for attending today. I'll close the webinar now. Please feel free to access to further support should you need, and we'll hopefully hear from you soon.